My name is Victor Konrad. I'm the co-director of the Borders and Globalization project. I'm a research professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, in Canada. And I've got a few thoughts on how the Borders and Globalization project has contributed to the understanding of borders. I see three major contributions. Now, there are many others as well, but one of the primary contributions is in the area of graduate student training. We have over 100 graduate students that have participated in the project over the last 5 years. There's still some projects ongoing, and my sense is that this is probably going to be the greatest legacy of the project. Another aspect of the project that I think is somewhat unique, certainly with regard to border studies, and that is the interaction between academics and non-academics, which prevails throughout the entire project. And that interaction, in my estimation, has been positive at a number of different levels within the project. First of all, at the initial point in which the forums that we put together, the committees that were convened, engaging both the academic and non-academic partners in the project, have been quite effective in identifying many of the research topics that have been engaged in by the students and various other researchers in the project. In many instances, the non-academic folks have actually participated quite substantially in honing the research topics and inspiring the graduate students. I think this is a very, very healthy thing for the academic world, and it's also very insightful for our non-academic partners. A third component is expanding the knowledge of bordering impacts in a globalized environment. What we're doing is we are taking what we have learned and we are conveying that in various forms, whether it happens to be traditional academic publications, all the way through to discussions that we're having with public groups. We're meeting in art galleries, we're meeting in community centers, we're engaged at all different levels across Canada, and this has resulted in a substantial contribution to this point, and it probably will result in even more as the project winds down in the next couple of years. So those are three of the major contributions that I see, and I'm sure there are even more contributions to come as the project winds down. Specifically, with regard to what we are doing in my area of interest, I'm interested in culture. I'm interested in how culture, which is a very, very broad and nebulous concept, how culture develops in the border interaction. And just to simplify that, make it a little bit more accessible, what I'm interested in, and many of the students who've been working with me and fellow faculty members and people from some non-governmental agencies and also some private concerns, we've all been very interested in how culture impacts borders and how borders impact culture. And there are probably multiple ways in which this can be evaluated. It sounds all very esoteric, but in actual fact, we're looking at aspects of popular culture, we're looking at literature, we're looking at the way in which Indigenous people in Canada are interacting with the borders that are dividing their world from our world, and dividing their own territorial areas as well. We're looking at the expanded impact of culture in an increasingly bordered world. It seems that in globalization, and this is the big paradox in globalization, it seems that in globalization, the world of borders should be breaking down. That walls and differences between people should become somewhat ameliorated, somewhat lessened by the fact that barriers are being taken down. Barriers in terms of distance, barriers in terms of language, barriers in many ways. But the opposite has happened. We now have more borders, we have more walls, we have more fences, we have more differences established between people than we've ever had before. And so that is one of the areas that really fascinates us with regard to our evaluation of border culture. I mentioned Indigenous peoples, and this, of course, is something that's very, very central to culture, because Indigenous people have different cultures than many of us in the country here in Canada, or in the United States, or some of the other countries that are engaged with us. Their cultures have been differentiated from ours, and we've made a point of differentiating them even more effectively through reservations and many differences that have been established between Indigenous peoples and those of us who have come from Europe and Asia and other parts of the world to live in Canada. So Indigenous peoples and borders is one of the major threads that goes all the way through this project. It relates to security, it relates to governance, it relates to many of the other themes in the Borders and Globalization project. We're also interested in cultural production and representation. And this is explored very effectively through areas like art at borders. It is explored through the literature of border lands and border areas. It is explored through dance. It is explored through theater. There are many representations that have been established, and these kinds of cultural productions have increased substantially as we get more walls and more barriers in our world. So it's a way of, in a sense, stating that there are problems, that we need to explore these areas, that they have engaged the fascination of people, and so this is a part of the studies that I find personally very, very exciting and interesting. Now, with regard to migration, I've been asked to say a few words about migration. Canada is, on the one hand, quite insulated from worldwide migration patterns, and on the other hand, Canada tends to choose its migrants. We have a relatively small migration stream coming into Canada, a very small percentage of people actually are incoming new Canadians on a regular basis. And so we don't have the kinds of issues that some European countries, primarily Germany, are dealing with at this particular time, with huge influx of people. Now, nevertheless, migration to Canada potentially is going to be a major concern as we get more into the 21st century, as people become more mobile, as Canada becomes more attractive because of the wealth of resources and territory and space that's available within this country. It's going to become more and more an issue. And then we're going to start to realize that even beyond our cities, we are going to be caught up in a series of social impacts, economic impacts, and cultural impacts that will accrue from these migration patterns that are developing within Canada. So Canada, I think, needs to be ready for migration. We need to be able to anticipate what the global trend in movement is going to have as far as an impact. Now, the movement of peoples, as we've heard from a number of experts, the movement of peoples worldwide hasn't really increased dramatically. The visibility of it has increased quite substantially, but it still sits at around 3% or so of the entire global population. But there are experts who also believe that is going to change, that there will be more of an impact of global migration in the 21st century, and countries like Canada in particular will have to deal with that. As I say, we've been insulated for a while. We've been selective for almost the entire history of Canadian immigration, and we need to prepare for what will likely be a greater impact on our country, our population, by migration trends. I think certain indications of this come to us directly from the kinds of events that have occurred just in the last year or so, in which immigrants, refugees to a large extent from places like Haiti and other countries, have suddenly appeared at our borders, and they've said, we want to come in. And I think Canada has to be ready for that.